Hey everyone, welcome back to the shop. Ben here, along with Billy, who's currently working on some boxing plates for the Tesla Evo. Say what's up, Billy.
Hello.
Hello. As you guys know, we've been working hard on this, keeping you updated. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see those updates, or check out the channel for that playlist because we're keeping detailed videos on the process. So as you can see, we're bringing you the latest project in the shop. We've got a silver Mustang GT that was recently acquired by the owner, and they bought it because it's a project car for them. They're going to be tracking this car quite a bit. When they bought the car, they were inspecting it and found that it's got some lower radiator support damage here, and that's not a big deal considering the fact that this is going to be primarily used for a track car. But after seeing the videos that we did and the product that we released for the Evo 8s, our removable tube front end, which you guys are familiar with through seeing videos. We've actually got a picture of one of them here in our office. He was wondering if we could maybe develop something like that for his car. So you know my answer to that. Sure, we can do that, no problem. So the first thing we're going to do is get the front apart on this car and start developing a removable tube front end. So we don't get a lot of opportunities to do, new chassis work or, develop custom chassis work. And I'm excited about this opportunity because we're doing a lot of exhaust work, quite frankly, aside from this Tesla Evo. And I like a good challenge. Plus, the removable tube front ends on the Evos have really been a successful product for us. I've been running mine now for about 4 years. And I mean, we've sold probably about 20 or 30 of those things now that I think about it, shipping them all over the world. So seeing if we can maybe put one together for the Mustang sounds like a good idea to me. I know there's a lot of Mustangs out there that are racing their cars, and being able to service them, pull the motors, do maintenance, whatever the case may be, the removable tube front end really does help simplify that process a lot. So go ahead and get this thing apart and see what we can do. Now I've got pretty much a majority of the front end pulled apart here. I've still got quite a bit still of the small stuff. For instance, now that I got the radiator out of the way, I've got to pull apart the AC condenser, get all that junk out of the way. I spoke to the owner. He and I have agreed to get rid of the AC system on this car since it's just going to be primarily a track car. It's by no means a daily driver where he's going to need AC. Plus, it's going to open up all that space that we want, given the fact that we're doing this tube front end. So, I don't know. You guys let me know what you think about this. I've never done a Mustang before. I'm going to do a little research on the internet first to take a look and see what's out there and make an educated decision on how I want to go about doing this. I call it a removable tube front end, but you guys may call it something else. It is mainly the lower radiator support. The traditional term in the Mitsubishi world is removable tube front or tube front. I guess in the Mustang world, a tube front would really consist of chromoly bars that would run along the inside line of the fenders here and essentially eliminate all of that fender well. I've seen that before as well. But for all intents and purposes, for what the customer and I are doing, we're looking at replacing this jaggedy bent up bar that he's got in the lower radiator section here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull all this apart as well. Additionally, you guys will notice that there is this big bar that's running across here. You may or may not be aware of what that is. What this is a power steering cooler. And I always giggle when I say that because that's all it really is. And their idea of the power steering cooler is not really having a traditional fin in tube style, you know, radiator or intercooler style cooler. It's literally just a bar that runs in the airstream and then runs back and recirculates back through the system. And the air that hits this bar is helping cool it down a little bit. Completely useless in my opinion. Now, if you're racing this thing regularly, then of course that's going to help a little bit, I'm sure. But for our application needs, it's just another piece that doesn't need to be in the way. So we're going to be deleting that as well. We do delete those on the Mitsubishis, my car, any of the tube fronts I've done before, we eliminate that. But yeah, that's what that is, and it's as simple as it is. It obviously does something, because it's not just this manufacturer, but many manufacturers that do that. There's obviously a reason for it. So, but deleting it has never resulted in any issues for myself or anyone else. Even guys that are road racing, I mean, you really have to be working the system very hard in order to overheat, you know, your power steering or boil it. I mean, this is not going to be a Pikes Peak hill climb car, so I don't think he's going to have any issues. And if he did, then we could run a more traditional style power steering cooler that would be more suitable to the space that we are going to dedicate to it, as well as obviously functionality. So with that being said, I'm going to move on and start removing more of this stuff. Strap you guys onto my forehead so you can see what I'm doing with my hands as I do it, and we'll start getting rid of all the AC stuff along with that power steering line. I'm going to get rid of that and recirculate it back through the system for them. Something else I was going to show you guys real quick that I've been meaning to show you in some of my videos, but I've not done so yet. I don't know if you guys have seen or used these before, but they're little dollies for your wheels that you put under each one of your wheels in your car. And we use these often at the shop, not only to move cars around and maximize space. Sometimes we got to stuff a car way in the corner because we've got a daily job that comes in that's a in and out job, and that's kind of what happened yesterday. We had to move the Mustang back and over so that I could bring in a couple of different cars and get some quick jobs in and out before bringing this back into the bay. And oftentimes when you bring a car in, you either have to recenter it, you know, and you don't want to have to keep backing it up a million times. And sometimes when you get a supercar like a Lamborghini or Ferrari, or even the R8 for that matter, you really got to dial it up and make sure that it's 100% centered, and even get the car up off the ground a little bit more so that you can get the arms underneath it and safely set it up on the rack. Well, these are a lifesaver. We've got 4 of them in the shop. We'll put them under each one of the wheels. We can really move it in position and slide the car around, adjust it, and get it off the ground a little higher in order to get the lifts under it. So since yesterday we had to move the car back and forth, it's now, as you can see, not exactly both in the center of the rack, but also it's on a little bit of an angle. So what I want to do is just swing the rear end out to the left a little more so that it's straight, and then I can get it dialed in for the rack. So I figured I would just show you guys what these are. I'm sure a lot of you know what they are and have seen them before, but for those of you that haven't, this is a little demo on what they are and how they work. So it's pretty simple. You just flip this switch over, and then this flap or switch, whatever you want to call it, controls whether or not this is going to open. Right now it's in the open position, so I can literally split these apart, and I'm going to just put this one over here on the back wheel, and they've got locks on each of the wheels so that it won't move around on you if you don't want it to. But you just simply slide it underneath the wheel like this. So you've got each one of the rollers on either side of the wheel. You flip the switch back over, and now you could just start pumping. And as you're pumping, you'll see that the wheels and the rollers are coming together, which is essentially lifting the car off the ground. And once you get to the end of the rack, or the rail for that matter, you'll see that it won't go up anymore. It just kind of slides back down to the last position. So that's where you take this little arm, you flip it over so that this will no longer go up, and it's now in its upward position. You can see the wheel is off the ground, and if I unlock this roller here, this position, or this particular wheel, is now free moving. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat this quickly on the other side with this other one. And they've got a nice little handle here that you can grab it by, pick it up. So now I've got both of the rear wheels on those rollers. You can see it's off the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to swing this tail of the car over. I'll let you guys see how I do that. And while it's up in the air like this, it's a little easier to get the rack arms underneath the car safely without having any issues. So that's that. Just a quick little demo of regular day tools here in the shop that make life a lot easier. Okay, so now that we've got everything cut on this car, we're gonna go ahead and put it up in the air, clean up the underside where the cut was made in order to get everything prepared for the boxing of that area. We're gonna weld in some plates that have some nuts on the back side, which are then gonna allow us to use them as receiving plates for bolting on the removable lower radiator support. So that's where we're at this point. So now that I've got everything in the air, you can see the cut and how it was, of course, not perfectly straight, and that typically happens when you're using a reciprocating saw like I used, but that's really the best way to get as clean of a cut as possible when doing something like this versus trying to use something like a plasma cutter. I would not recommend that in this application and for this purpose, because you want as straight of a line as you can possibly get. So we will take a sander to this and get it straightened out. We'll go ahead and take a sander to this grinder and flatten it out as nicely as we can in order to put together some nice receiving plates. And I will probably end up using a plasma cutter in order to cut out a small section here so that the nuts have a space to sit in a recessed area, because there's not really enough space in between the plate that I'm going to create and this frame rail section here, which is really just an insert. All right, before I get started on cleaning up the cut here and boxing in plates, I do want to talk a little bit through one of the other things that I'm doing here first. Since we are now going to keep this part rigid based on the customer's request, and we're only going to make the lower radiator support removable, one of the visual pain points is still having these original brake lines here in place, and there's really nothing wrong with them. I mean, you could upgrade them to stainless, sure, but they're serving a purpose, they're not leaking. There's really no reason to throw money at that kind of stuff unless you absolutely need it. At least that's my philosophy. So what I'm doing right now is, here's the traditional line path for the brake lines. What I'm now doing is I'm slowly and carefully bending them to follow the shape of the remaining rigid upper radiator section, which will sit recessed behind the new radiator, and everything should fit nicely together so that if he does have this removed for whatever service needs he has, it won't be in the way. So just doing that real quickly, and then I'll move on to boxing in those plates. Here we go. Got the brake lines carefully reshaped in order to follow the line of the upper radiator support. Now we've got full clearance when it comes to the bottom section. Alright, so at this point we now have the driver's side receiving plate, or boxing plate for that matter, with the receiving nuts welded into place. Everything came out real nice. And next step is I got to do the same thing on the passenger side. But so far what I ended up doing was using 4 bolts on each corner here, and I had to push the nuts on the far outside as I could. The reason I ended up going with 4 as opposed to my traditional 2 is because of how large the diameter is of the tube that I'm using, based on the dies and what I have available for me to bend tube, and how I would like to do this based on thicknesses and all the variables that you can come into when it comes to tube bending. So I'm using 1.5 inch chromoly tube that's 83 wall, and I only have so much space to work with. Normally I'd use like a 12 millimeter bolt and just do 1 on each side, or 1 above and below, kind of how I do on the Mitsubishi setup. But because of the fact that I don't have that space, I ended up doing 4 corner bolts. So that came out pretty nice. It's the first time I've done that style versus the 2 bolt, and I'm happy with it. So the next step, like I said, is to move on to just making this side the same. I'll spare you guys the video on that, since most of it you saw a moment ago, but that's where we're at and that's where we're going. After I get both sides the same with receiving plates, I'll start figuring out measurements and doing the tube bending. We've got that new radiator on its way, and I'm also going to need that in order to make the bracketry accordingly so that it holds it in place. So as I'm getting ready to start bending tube and building the plates that'll help mount this thing onto the front of the vehicle, I'm mocking everything up. I've got the center radiator support here, or I guess I'm not really sure what the correct term for this piece is, to be honest with you, but it's a center brace that's similar to the brace that holds up the coolant reservoir and overflow that sits up here. But by mocking this up using this little stool that has a little adjustable jack on it, it allows me to determine exactly what the length is that I'm going to need before I start bending tube, because that's really critical in ensuring that I have everything lined up for the brackets that are going to support the radiator, as well as what's going to be mounting to this brace, as well as the other brace that I was talking about a moment ago. So these are all critical preparation processes that one would need to use if they were going to do this at home. You know, I've bent a lot of tube and done quite a few of these front ends before on different applications. First time on a Mustang, but the most important thing is making sure that you have the length correct, because you don't want to be adding a lot of material to bring it upward. You certainly don't want to have a bracket that's hanging down lower than you desire it to be. So having the correct length that's going to come around and below is really going to set you up for success when you do this. And that's really what takes a lot of the time and hours that goes into something like this, is measuring and measuring and measuring to make sure that you get all your alignments correct and everything basically set up for mounting exactly the way that it was when it was from the factory. So that's what I'm doing right now, to set up some of these most critical points for us to use as a reference. And now I'm going to go ahead and make some plates and start. So what I just did is I marked out the holes to make sure they're going to be exact. And what I used, which you probably noticed almost hit me in the face because I dropped it, was an old tool that's got a wooden handle, which my grandfather actually has handed down to me, my mother's father. He was on the assembly line with Ford Motor Company back in the day. But as you can see, he made sort of his own tools at some point. He used to modify them for whatever he needed. This one's sort of just a blunt, not blunt, but it's got sort of a pointed edge. And it's perfect for taking prints of holes that you're going to want for whatever you're using it for. And this one happens to be the right diameter. So. And I'm very pleased with the end result. You know, a lot of the times with bending, especially when you're dealing with tolerances as tight as we are, making sure that we have enough space around the bolts in order to weld and not disrupt the path of the bolt, being that we want to use those flanged bolts. You obviously can do some trial and error throughout the process before you get it right. Well, this time I was able to get all the measurements down, and even though I'm dealing with millimeters here, I was able to get it lined up, which quite frankly for me is a first, given that I've played with this tube bender for several years now and I have a love-hate relationship with it, but I ended up getting it done on the first try today, so I'm happy with that. The good news when it comes to doing tube bending is that even if it doesn't go right the first time, you can toss that bend into a pile and be assured that it'll be used somewhere else later on. So now that I've got it all mocked up and I'm just using this stool to get it held into position, I'll go ahead and tack it into place, start welding, and then as you can see, I've got nice spacing to build a little bracket for that central support. And based on measurements, the radiator sits just above this bar, allowing me to build some brackets off of it as well. So coming together really quickly and nicely. If you guys have any questions or feedback, feel free to leave it below. This is my first time doing a removable tube front or lower radiator support, whatever you want to call it, on one of these cars. As I mentioned before earlier in the video, I've done several on Mitsubishi applications, but given this is the first round on this one, I'm happy with how it's going. See, I've got the tube front for the most part finished. All I have to do now is build the bracketry that's going to hold the radiator in place, the bracketry that's going to hold any other mounts like this center point mount, whatever. Again, I don't know what that thing's called, but forgive me for those of you that are tearing your hair out probably going, why does he not know what that's called? It's a center radiator support mount bracket thing. I don't know what to call it because it's a Mustang, and I'm not terribly familiar with Mustangs and the way that they use certain terminology. I know that they have this swirl pot, whatever you want to call this, coolant overflow, whatever. I'm sure I sound like an idiot. I don't care. Billy's over here laughing at me. It's okay. You gotta have fun. As you can tell, at the end of the week, I'm burnt out, but really excited about how this is coming along. Should get it back to the customer here by early next week. All right, next step, now that we've got everything welded up in place and bolted up in place for our lower support here, we're going to go ahead and build the bracketry that we need in order to hold both the radiator as well as mount to our support bars like this one here. So first things first, I'll go ahead and just knock this one out because it's simple and straightforward. Then I'm going to mock up the radiator similar to the way I had it before, where the vehicle was lower and was supported by that little stool. And then we'll go ahead and start mocking up those brackets. Should be able to wrap this one up here relatively quick in terms of this scope of work. And we'll see if there's anything else the customer wants to do before we send this one back home. If you guys are enjoying this, and if you have any interest in having something like this done to your own Mustang, feel free to get in contact with us. You can email us, give us a phone call. The best way to look us up is either through Facebook or even on Google, for that matter. And yeah, really looking forward to giving you guys an insight into some of the newer projects that are going to be heading our way here. As you know, we recently acquired an R8, and over the weekend, I took the time to remove everything for the intake system as well as the exhaust system to create a blank canvas for myself. I am going to spare you guys the process of pulling that all apart because I obviously am very new to that platform. So I took my time and was using online references to see how to take things apart carefully without breaking things. And I really learned a lot, but I know that's off topic for this particular video. I just want to give you guys a little bit of a teaser and insight on what you can expect to come here in the near future. But for the meantime, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying this video, and we'll move forward on this project. Get it. guys. So at this point I've gotten everything in place for the radiator supports. Now all I've got to do is reassemble the car, add the fluids, pretty much ready to wrap this one up. Well, that wraps up the Mustang. Just got it all reassembled, and customer Joe is in the loop. He's very excited about the end result, which of course I'm very pleased with as well. This was the first time I got an opportunity to do a tubular radiator support, front end, whatever you want to call it on this thing. I like to call it a tube front end. It's removable, and it makes things a lot easier when it comes to servicing the vehicle. Plus it looks really cool as well. You got a nice little view inside of there. Anyway, the next thing for me to do now is start the vehicle up, burp the cooling system now that we've replaced the radiator, and get the vehicle back to the customer. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this one in the comments below. All of you guys are doing a great job with subscribing and hitting the like button. Much appreciated. But I want to hear more feedback. I really don't get any feedback from you guys other than some very basic, if not any feedback at all on my videos, and it would really help me improve upon what I do, as well as ensure that I'm going down the right path with my design work, because a lot of this stuff is on the fly. Like I said, I've never done a front end for a Mustang like this before. I've done plenty of Mitsubishis, but I want to make sure that the community at large thinks that I'm doing this right. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys. We'll go ahead and end this episode. Be sure to hit like, subscribe with notifications on, and I'll catch you in the next round.